Living next to the meth house in Fresno was like living next to a time bomb. You never knew when things would explode. Our neighborhood used to be friendly. We had block parties and everyone knew each other's names. But then they moved in and the warmth turned cold. The windows would always be boarded up. There was a strange sort of smell that filled the air. Ma always kept warning me not to go there, and she sounded just so full of worry every time I heard her voice about that. She was scared, and it made me scared too. We overheard what was going on in that house. Not just cooking up meth, more like that. They had ties to gangs and were into some dark stuff with Santa Muerte, the saint of death. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, but it was happening right next door. The worst part was the partying. I remember seeing girls, not much older than me, going in and never coming out the same. The rumors said those parties were nightmares. They'd get you hooked on meth and do awful things. It was like they were trying to pull everyone into their darkness. Everyone in the neighborhood was too scared to do anything. We all just lived in this constant fear, whispering about what was happening, but feeling too helpless to stop it. One morning, everything changed when the police showed up. It was still early, and the loud bang of the door being knocked down woke me up. It felt like everyone around was quietly watching, barely breathing. The police moved in fast, wearing heavy vests and looking serious. They found a lot of scary stuff in that house. There were places where they made meth, which looked dangerous with all those bottles and weird liquids. And then there were these creepy altars for Santa Muerte, decorated with skulls and other scary symbols. Every corner of the house seemed to have something to do with scary rituals. It wasn't just a drug bust. It was like the police were uncovering a hidden world of bad stuff that had been happening right next to us. After the raid, it was like a bad spell had been lifted off our street, but the damage was done. The neighborhood felt wounded, haunted by what had happened next door. For my family, there was a wake-up call. We realized that evil wasn't something distant. It could be living right beside you, hiding behind a normal-looking door. When I decided to dig into our family history for a school project, I didn't expect to hit a wall, especially not with my mom, Ellen. From the start, she seemed uneasy, always changing the subject whenever I brought it up. It was weird. The more she avoided my questions, the more I needed to know what was being hidden. After much pushing, it had to come out, and it dawned on me like a ton of bricks. My grandfather, the person I had never met and with scarce stories about him, was nothing of what one could imagine. He was a monster, and somehow he had hurt my mother in a manner that I hadn't even been able to piece together. To know such a thing about my granddad, who is supposed to do nothing but protect and love his family, made me sick in my stomach. But that wasn't the deal breaker. My Uncle Michael, my mom's identical twin, saw what the agony and devastation of his sister were. He couldn't see that happening to her. One night, full of anger and desperate to protect his sister, he confronted their dad. Things escalated, and Michael ended up doing something drastic. He hit their dad, but he didn't just hit him, he killed him. That moment changed everything for our family. Learning all this was overwhelming. It all started to fall into place for me. Why was Mom so overprotective in such a way that she kept trying to keep me away from the darker realms of our past? She wasn't a nag, always overprotective. She tried to save me from getting hurt, both physically and consciously aware of the happenings. Learning this secret was like finding a door in a house that had not been visible before. I was just suddenly into what is my family's history, much darker and far more painful than I ever imagined. And to see my mom and Uncle Michael in this new light, everything changed. Before, I just thought they had a tough past, but now I realize they were like heroes. They didn't just get through bad times, they fought through them, dealing with stuff so scary I could hardly imagine it. and they didn't let it beat them. They were stronger and braver than I'd ever known, battling through darkness and still standing tall. Knowing they had such courage made me proud to be their family. Coming to terms with my family's dark history was tough. It was a mix of sadness for what my mom had to endure, respect for Uncle Michael's fierce love and protection for his sister, and a heavy heart for the reality of my lineage. In high school, life was pretty standard until everything flipped upside down. Judy, who was practically family but not blood related, had to break some heavy news to me. My parents, who always told me if they were even a bit late, had disappeared without a trace. This wasn't like them, and it sent a shockwave through my world. The days that followed were confusing and scary. Everyone tried to say comforting things, but those words felt empty. I felt stuck in this eerie loop. One moment full of hope and the next hopeless. It is as if some invisible force had drawn off my parents, and I was just left reaching for nothing. It was like being on a microscope slide at school, with everyone looking at me with those sad eyes or whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. They talked about where my parents could be, but also about darker stuff, guessing and rumors that made my heart sink. With time flowing, however, there was no answers. I had to learn to keep going without them, even when life turned out to be anything but okay. It felt like learning to walk all over again, each step heavier and carrying the weight of not knowing what happened to them. Many years have passed since that day, and while I have learned to live without my parents, the biggest question has always been where they went. It just somehow never ceased to bother me. This cold-heartedness always follows me, reminding me of when things fell through. Their case isn't something the police talk about much anymore. It's like a file tucked away in a drawer and forgotten. Now, when people in town mention it, it sounds more like a ghost story they tell each other, the kind that makes you shiver, not because it's cold, but because it's a bit too real. My story has become one of those tales that gets passed around, adding an eerie vibe to the already quiet streets of our town. I'm a lot older now, living without it, having learned how to put up with this hole. Part of me is toughened up and more cautious by it. The hope for finding out has grown small, and sometimes I think maybe it's better not to know. But sometimes, late at night, in those quiet moments alone, I catch myself listening for them, hoping for any sign that they might come back. Deep down, I'm always waiting, even if part of me is afraid of what the truth might be. Some stories, especially those scary ones, don't always have answers. I've always known my life was a bit different. Growing up, my parents were these almost mythical figures, rarely around, but somehow providing a life that seemed too good, with questions about their business always met with vague answers. My aunt, the rock in our family, finally sat me down one day with a look I'd never seen before. A mix of sadness and seriousness that immediately told me this wasn't just another family chat. She revealed the truth about my parents. They were involved in human trafficking, part of a dark underworld that was responsible for a tragedy where dozens of people looking for a better life died, frozen, in the back of a seafood truck. Hearing this shattered my world. The comfort and wealth I was brought up with were built on something unimaginable. The mysterious disappearances of my parents suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. As the investigation into their activities became public, the details emerged in the media, each report like a blow. The people who died were packed into a truck, hidden among seafood, thinking they were on their way to safety and opportunity. Instead, their journey ended in a cold, silent tragedy. The public's reaction was swift and harsh. My parents were branded as monsters, and by extension, I was caught in the backlash. The more I learned, the more I realized that their disappearance might have been tied to their crimes, perhaps even a consequence of the dangerous world they were part of. It felt like a betrayal, learning that the people I missed and idolized were capable of such horror. Dealing with the aftermath was a nightmare. Everyone's looks and whispers made it clear they saw me as an extension of my parents' crimes. I was drowning in a legacy of darkness, every friendly face now shaded with doubt. The realization that all my life was supported by taking advantage of and inflicting misery upon others was a heavy load. It made me question everything I knew about my family and me. This fact was to live with oneself. It meant wrestling with grief, anger, and a feeling of the greatest betrayal that I had ever been. Supposed to guide and care for me, my parents changed into eerie, unknown strangers with a grim past. I had to come to terms with the fact that the life I knew was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a family legacy marred by crime and suffering. It was a journey through emotions I never thought I'd have to navigate, from shock and disbelief to a deep, unsettling understanding of the cost of their actions, not just on those they exploited, but on their child. I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and my aunt was one person I grew up looking up to. She has given her life to serving the people who need direction most, and more importantly, the former criminals trying to reform and find their way back into society. Her job wasn't easy, but she tackled it with warmth and determination, making her stand out. I remember her telling us about the various individuals she helped. Still, she often mentioned one man in particular because of his quiet nature and how different he seemed from the others. This man was reserved, keeping to himself most of the time and speaking only when necessary. My aunt found him intriguing, not just for his silence, but also for his unusual interest in topics that would make most people uneasy. Despite his eccentricities, she treated him like any other person she was helping, offering rides and support to ensure that he had everything needed for a fresh start. But that changed dramatically when the quiet man was arrested. It transpired that he was a serial killer responsible for a series of monstrous murders that had puzzled the local police. This came as a big shocker to one and all, especially to my aunt, who was unknowingly helping him with his chores and handling active crimes. That she had been so close to such a dangerous person, and she never knew it, haunted her and us all in this family. His arrest and hideousness of his crimes were displayed all over the news, leaving both my aunt and those around her, to whom he had presented himself as an honest and caring person, with the feeling that they had taken a hard hit. Up until that moment, she believed in the goodness of people and their possibility for a change from within, but this experience shook her. She couldn't help but question her judgment. She even went ahead to question the nature of her work, swimming with heavy guilt and wondering what if she didn't know. This incident impacted my aunt's perspective on her career and left a deep scar on our family's sense of safety. And that's the bitter pill that everybody's got to swallow. The fact that whatever part of our lives got touched, in some kind of long, short, or brief way, directly or indirectly, by this entity capable of perpetrating such an ugly act. It stood in glaring light as an ominous reminder of the unpredictability and secret dangers behind the mask of normalcy, testing the noble intentions for which my aunt helped those on a second chance mission.